Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of Meezan lecture series. As far as the last few sessions are concerned, if you recall, we have started to study the Jihad Sharia, or the directives which relate to Jihad, which is a very, very important topic, especially in current times, where it is the most misunderstood doctrine, I would say, and therefore it is all the more reason that we must try to understand all these directives, because of course when the use of force is involved, whenever there is militancy, whenever there is armed warfare, then there are certain limits, there are certain restrictions that have to be followed, because human life is something that possesses the greatest of sanctities. We had started to study the Shariah of Jihad, as has been enshrined by Ustaz Javed bin Ghamidi in his book Meezan, and we had studied this whole topic, and if you recall, we had divided it, or as Ustaz himself has divided it, into various topics. So if you will see on your screen, these topics are displayed. So these are basically 5 topics under which we are studying this very, very important conception. So the permission of jihad is the first of these topics, and we have already covered that. Next is the directive of jihad, which means the actual commandment of jihad, and this has been basically outlined in Surah Baqarah verses 190 to 194 that we have already studied, and the nature of the obligation is something that we have already covered. So we will be now continuing with the driving force, which is the second part, and then the ethical limits, which is the third part, and fourth, the ultimate goal, and this will complete the directive of jihad. After that, the third main subtopic is divine help, the fourth is captives of war, and 5 is spoils of war. So as far as the driving force is concerned, we have already seen from what we have studied earlier on that the armed warfare which these verses mention, they must not be undertaken in any way, as the Quran says, to gratify one's whims, or nor to obtain wealth or riches, or to expand the frontiers of an Islamic state. It must also not be undertaken to acquire fame, or to appease the emotions of communal support, partisanship, and animosity. On the contrary, it should be taken only and only for the cause of God. And for this, the words which the verse use is fi sabilillah, which means in the way of God. And basically what has been said is qatilu fi sabilillah, which means you wage war in the way of God. You wage war for the cause of God. And at the very beginning, the Quran is clarified that such a sacred undertaking has no relationship with personal or selfish motives. It is the war of God that His servants and His people, His creatures undertake at His behest, according to the guidelines provided by Him for His cause. So remember, He has given us a detailed guideline in this regard. So as far as we are concerned, or people who undertake this all-important task is concerned, whenever the need arises, they act as mere agents and instruments of the will of God. They have no objective of their own before them in this undertaking. Rather, they have to fulfill the objectives of the Almighty, and they cannot deviate in the least from this capacity. So the Quran has very aptly put forward how this war has to be waged purely and purely for the cause of God. So it says, "Allazina amanu yuqatiluna fi sabilillah, wallazina kafaru yuqatiluna fi sabilit taghut, faqatilu awliya ash-shaytan, inna kayda ash-shaytani kana dha'ifa." Those who have professed faith fight in the cause of God, and those who have rejected faith fight in the cause of Satan. So fight you against the friends of Satan, ever feeble indeed is the plot of Satan. So as far as this verse is concerned, we know that this verse has a very, very strong and very, very, I would say, direct message it gives us. And the Prophet himself has also explained very forcefully this very purport of the Quran, that nothing except the will of God, nothing except the cause of God has to be held in one's mind as the sole objective. I would like to quote certain narratives now, which Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi has cited in his book, which actually give us exactly the same message, that this war has to be fought only and only for the sake of God. So, this is Bukhari and Al-Jami Sahih. It says that Abu Musa Ashari narrates that once a person came to the Prophet and said that some people fight for the spoils of war, some for fame, and some to show off their valor. He then asked the Prophet, which of them fights in the way of Allah? The Prophet replied, only that person fights in the way of Allah who sets foot in the battlefield to raise high the name of Allah. And then we have Abu Umama Bahili, and this has been recorded in the Sunan of Imam Nasai. He says that he narrates from that a person came to the Prophet and asked, what is your opinion about a person who fights for monetary benefits and fame? The Prophet replied, he will gain nothing. The person repeated his question 3 times, and each time the Prophet, peace be upon him, gave the same answer and then said, the Almighty never accepts a deed until it is pure and done merely to please Him. And then we have Abu Huraira reporting, and this is recorded by Imam Muslim in his Al-Jami Sahih. He says that, he actually narrates that once the Prophet said, the fate of 3 types of people shall be decided first on the day of judgment. A person who was martyred while fighting, the Almighty will remind him of His favors. Once the person remembers them, the Almighty will ask, what did you do for me? He replied, I fought for you until I embraced martyrdom. The Almighty will say, you have told a lie. You fought so that people would acknowledge your bravery, and that has already taken place. The Almighty would then order for His punishment, and he would be dragged by his face and thrown into hell. And then we have Ubadah ibn Samit narrating from the Prophet, recorded once again by Imam Nasai in his Sunan. He says that a person who fought in the way of Allah with the intention that he would gain a rope from the war booty to tie a camel will only get that rope and nothing else. And then we have Muaz ibn Jabal. This also has been recorded by Imam Nasai in his Sunan. Narrates that once the Prophet said, wars are of 2 types. A person who fought merely to please Allah, obeyed his ruler in the war, spent the best of his wealth, was affectionate with his fellow fighters, and abstained from spreading disorder and evil. Then all the time he spent in the war, whether he was awake or was asleep, he shall earn reward for him. And a person who fought for fame and to earn the praises of the world and disobeyed his ruler during the war and thereby created disorder, he would not be spared. So clearly you can see that how the Almighty has outlined that the war that has been to be fought has to be solely for His cause, solely to raise His name high, solely to implement His will. And if any other motive creeps into this noble venture, then the Almighty says that, well, it could be fame, it could be your own bravado, it could be your own intention to seek war booty. It could be that you would like to expand the frontiers of the country that you're living in, and that is something that is special for you or specific to you. And as far as the Almighty is concerned, He would not give any credit to such a person. So such is the importance to understand that this is a war that has to be fought for the cause of God, and this actually means that all other causes which God does not sanction will hold no value. And we have already discussed that the only cause which God has now allowed us to fight for is oppression and injustice. So remember, earlier on we have discussed that there are 2 basic types of qital or warfare or armed warfare. One of them is against people who have denied the truth intentionally, and it is to punish them. But this was specific in the era of God's messengers, and this has already taken place. And now no one can wage war to punish disbelievers, and therefore the only other chance or the only other scope for which this war has to be fought is against oppression, injustice and persecution, and that too, as we have discussed, where diplomatic ties and negotiations fail. Any other reason for which, if the war is fought for any other reason except to curb persecution, to curb injustice and to curb oppression, then any other reason would not be God's cause, and that is something which God will not like. So it is this special status of qital or armed warfare that makes it an act of great reward for the believers. It is a great reward for the believers, and precisely this is what the Almighty has said This is Surah Al Imran, verses 169 to 171. I'm just reading the translation. It says, "And do not consider those who are killed in the way of Allah as dead. Nay, they are alive with their Lord, and they are being provided for. They rejoice in what Allah has bestowed upon them of His bounty, and rejoice for the sake of those who have not yet joined them, but are left behind, not yet martyred. But on them too no fear shall come, nor shall they grieve. They rejoice in a grace and a bounty from Allah, and that Allah will not waste the reward of the believers." So as you can see, the Quran has made it amply clear that people who die as martyrs, people who embrace martyrdom, they are actually, when in the life of barzakh, or in the life hereafter, before they are going to rise on the day of judgment, when they are in the confines of barzakh, they are alive in a certain way and they receive God's sustenance. So therefore, it is very much important to understand that as far as the scope of the war is concerned, and as far as the special status of those who receive this martyrdom is concerned, has that very, very coveted value. Now, let us see what the Prophet has said in this regard. So he says that this is reported by Abu Huraira and recorded by Imam Bukhari in his Al-Jami As-Sahih. He says that a person who wages war in the way of Allah, and Allah full well knows who wages jihad in His way, is like a person who fasts during the daytime and stands in prayer during the night. And for such a person who fights in His way, Allah has taken upon Himself to take him to paradise in case He ordains death for him. And if this is not the case, He will reward him and send him back home safely with the spoils of war. So such is the reward which the Prophet has also cited on behalf of the Almighty, that such a person, if he dies, or he dies the death of a martyr, then the Almighty says that a person who wages war, regardless of what happens, is like a person who fasts during the daytime and stands in prayer during the night time. And if that person is killed as a martyr, then the Almighty says that He is going to take him to paradise. And if he is not killed as a martyr and he's sent back, then the Almighty says that He will reward him. So such is the value of this coveted endeavor. And in order to understand this, we have to also take a short pause and think of the fact that as people, as individuals, as servants of the Almighty, we must always pray to the Almighty that if the chance arises to sacrifice our life for the cause of God, we will not withhold ourselves. We will be the first to offer our lives. We will take the initiative. Also, at one other place, we know that Abu Huraira has also said that, tell me, this is something that is reported, that once a person came to the Prophet and that person asked, "Tell me a deed whose reward is equivalent to that of jihad." The Prophet replied, "There is no such deed." The Prophet then asked that person, "Is it possible for you that once the mujahideen, or the warriors, depart for jihad, you go to the mosque and keep standing in prayer without pausing, and also keep fasting simultaneously without breaking the fast?" The person replied, "How can anyone do this?" So, in fact, what is meant here is that such will be the reward of a person in this regard. So, the Almighty says there is no such deed which is equivalent to jihad, because it is as good as standing in prayer without pausing and fasting simultaneously without actually breaking the fast. This shows how the Almighty and His Prophet have given us these glad tidings, that a person who is so courageous as to sacrifice his life, how impelling that reward would be. At another instance, Abu Huraira reports from the Prophet, there are 100 levels in paradise which the Almighty has prepared for those who wage war in His way. Each of these levels is separated from one another with a distance equal to that between the earth and the sky. Again, this of course is a expression of the fact that as far as the reward is concerned, it is huge. That's something that we cannot imagine. So there are 100 levels in paradise, and each level has that distance which is equal to that between the earth and the sky. So these 100 levels are for those who have waged war in the way of the Almighty. So clearly we can see once again that inspiration and that special effort being done in order to induce people to not withhold themselves. And then there is another thing that has been said, and that is Abu Huraira once again reports from the Prophet that I swear by the Almighty, this is what the Prophet has said, I swear by the Almighty that a person who is wounded in the way of God, and Allah knows full well who is actually wounded in his way, he shall be raised on the day of judgment such that his color will be the color of blood, with the fragrance of musk around him. So Sahal ibn Sa'ad says that the Prophet once said, to reside in a border area for a day to protect people against an enemy invasion is better than this world and everything it has. So clearly, viewers, we can see that as far as the reward is concerned, it is something that really inspires us. And a little note of caution here might be of very important here, because you see, people today who give up their lives in suicide bombings in ways that are not authorized by the Sharia, it is such narratives which impel them, which actually inspire them to give up their lives, because such is the reward which is promised. But remember, this reward should not be misplaced, or these narratives should not be misplaced. Remember, this whole endeavor of armed conflict, armed warfare, has to be undertaken at the behest of God according to the limits that He has provided. And one of the greatest and one of the most prominent of these is that jihad cannot be waged by an individual or by an organization. It has to be waged by a state. Only a state authority can give a signal for jihad. We have already studied the reasoning behind that, and we've already seen how the Prophet has said that that this armed warfare can only be waged behind the Imam of the Muslims, the ruler of the Muslims. So by narrating these ahadiths before young minds and indoctrinating them for suicide bombings or for such missions is something that is absolutely, something which is going to mislead these young boys and girls at the same time, by not making them realize that if they have to undertake this effort, then it has to be in the right direction and in abiding by the limits which have been set forth by the Almighty. Now, as far as the third important thing is concerned in this regard, we have to study certain ethical limits that have to be followed while conducting jihad. And this is also something which has been underlined by these verses of Surah Baqarah. And it says that moral values have to be given priority over everything in all circumstances. And even in circumstances of war, the Almighty has not given any person the permission to breach ethical principles. So you can realize that not only in normal circumstances when we are living peacefully are we to follow ethical principles and not break our promises. The Almighty says that even when war is being conducted, it's like an emergency situation, it's like something which is contingent. Even in such circumstances, the Almighty says that Muslims can fight the enemy and can displace them from the city from which they themselves were displaced, and they should be killed wherever found. But in this regard, as far as certain ethical limits are concerned, they have to be obeyed. They were allowed to take this step because of the reign of oppression and injustice that was let loose by the enemy, which was the Quraysh, and because the truth of Prophet Muhammad's message had been made manifest to them, and they had intentionally denied it. But in this regard, we know, as we have just discussed, that there are two very important stipulations and there are two very important conditions. So, Ustaz Ghamidi, while writing the first and second of them, says, so firstly, Muslims should not initiate proceedings to violate anything sacred. Consequently, war is permitted near the Baytullah and in sacred months only if the enemy takes the initiative. Muslims can in no case commence such proceedings. So, first of all, as we can clearly see, that this can only be done when the initiative is by the opponents. Muslims cannot take any such initiative in sacred months. Secondly, Muslims can answer any excess committed by the enemy by inflicting equal damage only. They have no right to go beyond this. They can wage war, but in no case are they allowed to exceed the limits and commit any excesses. For the Almighty is greatly displeased by such an attitude. He only helps those who never cross the limits set by Him in any circumstances. So also we know that the verses that we have discussed in Surah Baqarah, this has been spelled out in a very emphatic way, in a very emphatic way. So the words actually are a sacred month for a sacred month. Similarly, other sacred things too are subject to retaliation. Therefore, if anyone transgresses against you, you should also pay back in equal terms. Have fear of Allah and keep in mind that Allah is with those who remain within the bounds stipulated by religion. This shows the importance of what we have just said. And these verses are actually implying that fighting in the forbidden months or fighting within the boundaries of the haram is a major sin. It's a big sin. But if the disbelievers disregard their sanctity, Muslims on account of qisas also have the right to strip them of the protection that these sacred entities afford for them. So the words are ash-shahrul haram bi-shahril haram, a sacred month for a sacred month. The life of every person carries great sanctity in the eyes of the Sharia. So when a person violates the sanctity and kills someone, he himself shall be deprived of the right of the sanctity for his own life to avenge this deed. Similarly, the sanctity of the forbidden months and of the haram itself shall be upheld in all circumstances on the condition that the disbelievers also uphold it and do not oppress and tyrannize people in them. But if they unsheathe their swords in the forbidden months and in the sacred land of Mecca, then on account of qisas, they themselves deserve to be divested of the protection these months and this land hold for them. And that is what precisely is meant by the words ash-shahrul haram bi-shahril haram, a sacred month for a sacred month. And the verse actually goes on to say that taking qisas is forbidden for the months it is necessary. Again, of course, that is a given. The qisas of other sacred entities must also be taken. Wal hurumatu qisas. In other words, if the disbelievers deprive Muslims of the right of protection that certain sacred things hold for them, the believers have also the right as a result of qisas to pay them back in the same coin or measure. So whatever measures the disbelievers adopt in violating the sanctity of the haram and the forbidden months, Muslims too can retaliate. But they must fear God that they must not go beyond. They must retaliate on equal footings. They should neither initiate such violations nor exceed the limits. These are the two things. Neither can they initiate this violation, it has to be from the enemy, nor can they exceed the limits while retaliating against any aggression in this regard. So only those people become worthy of divine help who are fearful of the Almighty in all circumstances. Now, as far as these ethical limits are concerned, Surah Tawbah is the surah that has announced the punishment for those who had deliberately rejected Prophet Muhammad and his message. So in this particular surah, which is Surah Tawbah, the Prophet has been directed to declare null and void all pacts and treaties and embark upon a final assault against the disbelievers. But it is explicitly stated in verse 4, which is verse 4 of Surah Tawbah, that all treaties that have been concluded with a time frame, treaties, agreements which have a time bar, must continue till that period is over. So remember, even in the case of war, the Almighty did not allow the Muslims to break these treaties. It was said that those pacts which don't have any time bar, of course, they can be revoked. But those pacts which are bound by any time period, they cannot be revoked. They must be fulfilled to that time. Also in Surah Anfal, Muslims are emphatically told that even if a nation with which Muslims are under obligation of a contract is guilty of oppressing the Muslims in matters of their religion, the Islamic State does not have the right to help these Muslims if this amounts to a breach of contract made with that nation. This is something very huge. Viewers, you must make a mental note of this. So what is being said in Surah Anfal is that if a nation with which Muslims are under obligation of a contract, so there is a Muslim, Muslims are basically, they have a pact with another country, and that country is oppressing Muslims in matters of religion. So if you have a pact, then you cannot even violate that pact and start any initiative in this regard. And in this regard, the Quran has made it very, very clear. It says, and those who accepted faith but did not migrate and those who accepted faith but did not migrate to Medina, you owe no duty of protection to them until they migrate. But if they seek your help in religion, it is your duty to help them, except against a people with whom you have a treaty of mutual alliance. This is what was referred to earlier. Against people with whom you have a mutual alliance, and Allah sees what you do. So, on a number of occasions, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has stressed how dreadful a sin breach of promises. So remember the ethical limits we are talking about regarding waging war. Even in that case, you cannot break that treaty if it is time barred. If there is a promise that you have made with your enemy, you cannot break that enemy. And now I would also like to cite Ustad Ghamidi's narratives that he has recorded from various hadith books that he has collected, which actually stress how dreadful a sin breaching a promise stands. So Abu Sa'id Al-Khudri narrates from the Prophet, on the day of judgment, to proclaim the traitorship of a traitor and the betrayal of a person who betrayed his words, a flag shall be hoisted, which would be as high as the extent of his traitorship. And the Prophet also said, remember that no traitor or betrayer of promises is greater than the traitor who is the leader and ruler of persons. And then Abdullah ibn Amr narrates that the Prophet once said, a person who kills a mu'ahid will not be able to smell the fragrance of paradise, even though its fragrance can be smelt from a place as far off as 40 years from it in distance. So this is something very, very important to note, that mu'ahid actually means people who become citizens of an Islamic state by virtue of a contract. So all those non-Muslims who become a citizen of an Islamic state or a Muslim state by virtue of a contract, they are called mu'ahideen, because mu'ahid of course means citizenship by virtue of contract. So such is the sanctity of the life of a mu'ahid, that the Almighty says that actually a person who kills a mu'ahid, if he kills a mu'ahid, then he'll not be able to smell the fragrance of paradise, which means that he'll not even get close to paradise. So such is the sanctity not of just human life, not just of Muslim life, but even the life of a non-Muslim citizen who is living under contract in an Islamic state. And we can now see in various Islamic states where churches and temples of other religions, they are burnt down, they are simply razed to the ground, and horrific killings take place. Such is the heinous nature of this sin that the Almighty says, and of course the Almighty has forbidden such things, and His Prophet has said that if you do so, then you will not even have the fragrance of paradise. You cannot even smell the fragrance of paradise from a far off distance, which would of course once again tell them that this is something which is very grave. But if Muslims fear any foul play, of course this could always be an exception. So if they fear that there is any foul play and breach of contract from the enemy, then the Quran says they can also terminate the treaty and throw the promise on their faces on equal footings. So this is a very exceptional case when they feel that there is some foul play and something is going on behind the lines, behind the curtain, but they are very well able to verify it. But if such is the case, then they can terminate the contract. It's not that they cannot terminate the treaty and contract, but then it has to be something very palpable. So the words of the Quran are, and if you fear any treachery from a people, throw back their covenant to them on equal terms. Certainly Allah does not like the treacherous. This clearly tells us that in such exceptional situations, of course, this is absolutely fine. If you look at the words, it says Allah sawa. Allah sawa actually means that Muslims are authorized to pay back their enemy in the same coin. This means that the retaliation from their side must not exceed the harm inflicted upon them. And there are people who have deduced from these words the nullification of our treaty should be, necessarily declared openly before the other party. However, this deduction does not seem very sound, because these words do not support it. You don't have to actually announce that revocal of treaty. But this much must be inferred, that mere speculation should not impel a party to revoke it. Mere speculation. And this should only be done after some manifest proof of its violation from the other side comes before them. Because the Quranic word uses takhafanna, and this word in the Arabic language lays credence to this claim. Moreover, the condition is also of Allah sawa, which means that it has to be on equal footings. Now, in this regard, the Prophet is also explained this aspect in a very beautiful way, and I'm also now going to cite this narrative. So he has said that if a nation concludes a treaty with some other, it should not change it in any sense until the time period of the treaty expires, or if it fears some treachery from the other side. In these cases, it should throw the treaty before it by an open declaration on equal footings. So if a nation concludes a treaty with some other and it should not change it in any way, then this is something which is very evident. And also, there are some other directives besides these which have been outlined, that you should not in any way, take the initiative in this regard. If the treaties are time barred, you are not allowed to break that time period. And of course, if the exception is that you think that the opposite side or the enemy is taking advantage, then you can revoke the treaty, but that has to be done. But you just cannot do it in a way, just thinking that you can break a treaty for no reason. Now, there are some other narratives which describe some other ethical principles that are mentioned vis-a-vis certain hadiths that we have recorded. So I would not now also like you to study some of these narratives. I'll read out some of the narratives, because these narratives actually show how important certain other things which might be minor, which might be something that people might not realize, because of the fact that, of course, it's like a display of power, it's like a display of your might, that you might forget certain things, but they have to be noted down as well. So number one is a display of pomp and show. Pomp and pride should be avoided when an army sets out for a battle. In Surah Anfal, where the Quran has asked the Muslims to spend more time in the remembrance of God when a war is at hand, it has also asked them to abstain from show and pomposity. So the Quran says, "And be not like those who came out of their homes boastfully and displaying their grandeur, and those who stopped people from the way of Allah, even though Allah fully encompasses what they do." So a display of pomp, a display of, showing off your armory and everything, it should not be done. You have to be humble in this regard. The second thing is that people who want to remain neutral in war should be left alone and not be troubled in any way. In other words, non-combatants, they cannot be harmed. So the Quran has stated in Surah Nisa verse 90, "Or those who approach you such that they neither have the courage to fight you nor their own people, and are such that had Allah willed, indeed He would have given them power over you, and they would have fought you. So if they withdraw from you and fight not against you and offer you peace, then Allah does not give you a permission to take any action against them." So people who would have decided to remain neutral, who would not like to take sides, we have been told in this regard that they cannot be harmed in any way. The third thing in this regard is people who neither take part in a battle nor are able to take part in it as per the dictates of custom as well as sense and reason should not be killed. So Abdullah ibn Umar reports from the Prophet that once in a battle, when it became known that a woman had been killed, the Prophet ﷺ emphatically forbade the killing of women and children. Again, because women and children, they are not combatants, they are not part of any war army, so it has been strictly forbidden that they in no way can be harmed. The fourth thing in this regard is people among the enemy should not be killed by setting them ablaze. Abu Huraira narrates that once when the Prophet bade the Muslims to set out for a battle, he named two persons and directed the Muslims to burn them if they encountered them. However, when the Muslim army was about to set out, he said, "I had asked you to set two people ablaze. The truth of the matter is that it is only Allah who can punish someone in this matter or in this manner. So, if you find these two, just kill them." So it clearly is evident from this narrative that initially the Prophet had ordered them that whenever they catch these two people, they have to burn them to death. But it seems that later on the Almighty revealed to the Prophet that this is something that should not be done. Burning to death is only God's prerogative, which He shall do in hell. In this world, if you have to kill people, it should be not through burning them, by other means. The fifth thing, which is mentioned again as an ethical principle, is that plundering and looting should be abstained from. Abdullah ibn Yazid narrates that the Prophet stopped the Muslims from snatching anything from the common people while the Muslim army marches into the enemy territory. A person from the Ansar narrates that once, while traveling for a jihad, because of great compulsion, some people of the Muslim army snatched some goats to appease their hunger. When the Prophet came to know about this, he overturned all the utensils and remarked, "Plundered food is no good than dead meat." So, how effectively the Prophet has conveyed this lesson that plundering and looting the wealth and assets and belongings of people who are not part of the war, that in no way can be done, because this is something which is against ethical and moral principles. The sixth thing is that dead bodies should not be mutilated. You see how important it is. Every directive that we find in these narratives tells us one after the other how important it is to remain within limits while conducting a war. So the sixth thing is that dead bodies should not be mutilated. Buraidah narrates that among the directives the Prophet would give while sending an army, a Muslim army, should be an emphatic assertion to abstain from mutilating dead bodies and from disfiguring them. Again, a very, very important thing. The seventh thing in this regard is that setting up obstructions and robbing travelers is forbidden. Muaz ibn Anas narrates that once, when he and others in the company of the Prophet embarked upon a campaign of jihad, it was observed that people had been obstructing the place where the army was to disembark and were busy robbing the passers-by. When this complaint reached the Prophet, he publicly announced at once that any person who obstructs the place of disembarkment and loots the passers-by is in fact not doing jihad. So clearly, viewers, you can see how important it is that jihad is not to be undertaken in any way, in any form, in which non-combatants are in any way harmed. It cannot be done to harm people for this reason. People must not be set ablaze. All treaties have to be taken care of. They must be fulfilled to their terms. You cannot obstruct ways even if the army is marching through. The common man must not in any way be put to any inconvenience. And then people who are not part of any form of combatants, they cannot form any form of combatants, like women and children, they cannot be killed in a war. If you look at the whole list of these directives, almost 10 of these ethical limits, they so very emphatically tell us that war that is to be waged for the cause of God must follow these restrictions. In no way can these restrictions be violated. Otherwise, it will not be a war for the cause of God. It will be that you have exceeded the limits. It is something which the Almighty has prescribed. So I'm going to end my talk here. Inshallah, we will look at the ultimate goal of jihad and some of the other directives that we have just seen in our later sessions. But now, if you have any questions regarding what we have studied, please raise them.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम.
Walaikum assalam.
जी डॉक्टर शहजाद, यू हैव डन वेरी वेल, पर लेकिन ये बहुत कॉम्प्लेक्स इश्यूज है. स्पेशली मेरा सवाल ये है कि आजकल के दौर में एज एन इंडिविजुअल इजंट इट के ये जो मतलब इससे बेसिकली जॉब ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट, individuals are just there to yani matlab not, because there are professional armies, there is a government to decide about that. So the individuals इसमें कैसे यानी participate कर सकते हैं, especially on
yes.
as a civilian part only?
Right. So you see, we've already discussed this in our last session, that today with the commission of the standing armies, which was of course not the case in the times of the Prophet, the Prophet's times did not witness any standing armies. People were just called for jihad, they were given a call and they would respond. So in that respect, it was the duty of every single citizen. But today, on behalf of these citizens, it is like the army has been commissioned by a ruler, by the state, and now they are responsible to defend the frontiers and to launch any offensive against aggression, or aggression in the meaning of persecution and oppression. So yes, the only way in which common people can fight, if such a chance does arise, is that they can present their own services out of their own will, and if the government accepts them, because you see, it's not that you just you just go and start fighting. You need to have a certain amount of skill. If you are not able to pick up a rifle and to aim and fire and use that rifle the way these complex and very very highly sophisticated weapons today are used, you will be of no use. So on behalf of your own self, it is the army who is doing that job. But it does happen at times when the government calls for help from the civilians. So in that case, of course, civilians, if they are trained for the purpose and for this whole cause, then they can present themselves. Otherwise, of course, we have already discussed that no individual has the right in any way to initiate jihad. Organizations or individuals have not been authorized in any way. This is the task of the state, and only when the state conducts jihad, and if it calls the citizens for help, then should they go. Otherwise, they should be praying for them. Of course, they should be providing things if they can, because we know wars are not just fought with weapons. Things are needed like medicine supplies, we have food, so they can help around in these things as well. And also realize that basically it is their government who is doing this task on their behalf, and whenever needed, they would present themselves.
जी मेरा एक और पॉइंट है, अगर if I'm allowed to do that.
Yeah, please go on.
Okay. मेरा दूसरा पॉइंट ये है कि अगर आपको ये फीलिंग हो कि जो आप जिस स्टेट के मेंबर हैं वो ही अप्रेसिव है, वो ही गलत चीजों पे जिहाद कर रही है, तो उस सूरत में आप क्या एटीट्यूड रख सकते हैं, कंसिडरिंग द टुडेज नेशनलिज्म और जो चीजें आप बाउंड होते हैं मुल्क के अंदर रहते हुए करने में। और दूसरा मतलब ये है कि एट टाइम्स आपको ब्रीफ भी गलत किया जाता है। मतलब जैसे मेरे ज़हन में एक एग्जांपल है कि जैसे अमेरिकन और यूके जिन्होंने जब इराक पे हमला किया तो उन्होंने ये अपनी कौम को गलत ब्रीफ किया कि वो वेपन्स ऑफ मास डिस्ट्रक्शन है, विच दे वर नॉट देयर। बाद में ये प्रूव हो गया है। तो इस सूरत हाल में एक इंडिविजुअल अगर इन चीज़ों को एनालाइज करता है तो वो क्या मतलब यानी वो क्या स्टेट के खिलाफ जाएगा या क्या करेगा?
You see, there are a number of scenarios which can be thought of. For example, people who were living in the US or the UK, for example, the example that you have given in this Iraq war, in which chemical weapons were thought to be housed there, and this was not the case. And we also know that later on Donald Rumsfeld actually apologized for that, and he admitted his mistake openly. So, this is something of we just cannot know whether this mistake was done honestly or it was done for some other motive. What we can best do is see what is on the face value. And if you are living there, for example, people who are living there, individuals or citizens of the United States or the United Kingdom, for them, of course, when they were told that the aggression is because of chemical warfare or chemical weapons, and that is why they have attacked to curb them or to stop them from using those chemical weapons, it could have been a very strong case in their favor. But once this was realized that this was not the case, and of course, you are in full position to call that person to account. He could be regarded to be a war criminal. There could be a whole series of investigations in which any human error could be given any benefit if we can think of. But as I said, justice in this regard has to be prevailed, because you see, a wrong decision has cost so many millions of lives. At times this happens. And also, if you're talking about the fact that, for example, if you're not part of that country and you are a third country, and the warring country and the country on which the war is being waged, they are two separate countries, then again, for us is to see whether the war is being waged on just purposes, on the purpose of persecution, if that is what is going on, or oppression and injustice. And if that is not the case, then the third country could be parliamentarians, it could be common individuals, and now we have the forum of the United Nations also, which is of course not that democratic as it seems to be. Basically, it's a power show of five countries which have a veto vote with them. So yes, on certain platforms and certain occasions we can still raise our voice. So on such occasions it is best that this has to be prudently, sagaciously and wisely put forth, that whatever is being done is done in a wrong way. It has no justification. And then again, there is an element that we are not always aware of the truth, because you see, we see what the media is telling us and it's not always true, and sometimes it has a lot of flack in it. So we have very little choice in this regard to make a decision. But in principle, we must understand that these guidelines that we have just read out from the Prophet himself and from the Quran, they have to be followed. And you cannot conduct war against anything else but this oppression. And if you do so, then you are, exceeding the limits. But remember, these directives are meant for Muslims, and they are being given these directives. And if you look at the nature of these directives, you'll find that these should hold as good as true for non-Muslims as well, because all these are common sense, experiential stipulations: not killing non-combatants, honoring your commitments, not looting and plundering wealth out of citizens. All these things that you can see clearly are not things which are confined to Muslims. These are universal principles. So yes, this is how you could portray, by telling people that these universal principles are being violated. If you have a voice in your own country, if you have a voice in any other part of the world, you should try to raise that voice. You should try to bring people together, exert some moral pressure, exert some peer pressure. So it depends on who you are, who we are, and what kind of difference that we can make.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Salman Aziz, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum assalam.
Sir, I have studied, and I think probably it is quoted in the IS magazines of Dabek and Rumayya also, that there was an incident that Ali Karamallah Wajho burnt some apostates upon their apostasy. Could you explain this?
Yes,
Was it
please go ahead.
contrary to the saying of the, was it contrary to the, God forbid, saying of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam?
We need to understand whether this actually happened or not. You see, a lot of things are reported in history and they might not have happened. There are two things that we can think of. Maybe, this is something that has been reported and it never took place, number one. And the other thing is, it could easily be possible that Ali was not fully aware of this directive, because you see, these hadith narratives, they are not something that are communicated far and wide. This is like talking to a few people. The Prophet might have said this to a few people, and it is only later on, when these hadiths got to be recorded in books, that everyone started to know about it. So remember, in the times of Ali, these narratives were not even recorded. A lot of sayings of the Prophet were said to individual people, who passed on to other individuals without spreading them far and wide. So it may well have been that he never even heard of these. But to me, more important is and more significant is, it seems to me that that the way these things have been reported and ascribed to Ali, we need to check their authenticity.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Akram Bhatti, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
Sir.
Walaikum salam.
My question is that here in America, a lot of Muslims from Pakistan, from Arabs, are in army, U.S. Army. And when
Yes.
U.S. wages war against Muslim countries, they even know that it's unjust war, but they cannot say no because the rules and regulation of the army. So how would one?
No, I think if you look at what has happened in the past, they can still say no. The only thing is that they'll be court-martialed, or they will be stripped of their earnings or their medals. This is precisely what happened to Muhammad Ali when he did not go for the Vietnam War. So he was court-martialed, so to speak, in this way. So it's not that you don't have an option. So if you are fighting for the truth, if you think that the war is being waged unjustly, you can always refuse that war, but then you have to face the consequences.
Okay, so face the consequences, but do not.
That is what we should do. Actually, you should face the consequences instead of joining into something which is an act of brutal aggression and injustice in itself.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much, Jazakallah.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. I have a question. I have actually two questions. So first of the question is related to the question that Akram Bhatti really just asked, which is that how many probably no or very few countries or governments wage war against persecution. Most of the countries wage war either to occupy land. So even if we are serving in military in our own country, we know that most of the time the wars are not waged against terrorism or persecution. They're waged for their own personal gains. So in that case, should we do the same?
You see, I mean, this is a choice that you need to make and understand before you become part of the army itself. You see, becoming or joining an army of a country is an option that you have, and of course you can take that option and you can just forsake that option. But in all circumstances, you have to understand that this could arise. I mean, this situation could arise that the warring country is the country who is the aggressing country, and at the same time, this aggression is done at the cost of injustice, and they themselves are bigger oppressors than the country that they're fighting against. So the option that they have in that case would be that they can just abstain from taking part in their war and again face the consequences. So you see, people, they make choices. Wars are not always fought in the lives of people. I mean, they take place far and few between. So yes, a person can make this choice that, well, he's going to fight, he's going to be part of the army, but if the army is going to do something which in his opinion is unjust, then he or she will not be part of it and face the consequences. And because wars are fought, I mean, it's not that you keep fighting wars every now and then. They are fought after many decades at times. So this could always be an option that the person never faces that dilemma, and he or she passes through the situation without such circumstances being arising. But at the same time, if they do arise, then yes, I would suggest that in this case, you have to avoid being part of that army and face the consequences.
Thank you. And my other question was, so according to Allah, the only reason that a state can wage a war is to protect or help the people who are being persecuted by a third party.
Yes, persecuted, or because we know from Surah Hujurat, persecution is one form of injustice and oppression. So there could be other forms of injustice and oppression as well. So if it is being brutal to its people, if it's killing people, for example, ethnic cleansing is one thing. You see, it's nothing to do with religion. And you start to ethnically cleanse people, like the Rohingya people, for example. That is something that's going on in the last maybe the last decade. The Uyghurs, which are in China, which are Muslims, and they are being persecuted. But they are being persecuted, I mean, according to the Chinese authorities, it's not that they are Muslims. It's not being a Muslim that is the cause of persecution. There are other causes. So it's not just being, not being able to practice your faith. Anything which you suffer as a result of injustice by being deprived of your right to live is something that warrants this.
Sir, I've got a couple of questions. First question is about the children killing, sir. On the other hand, sir, we have got the concept of child soldiers, and we have the history that Hitler used his child army to even burn the tanks. So in that perspective, how can we divide the line between the children and the child soldiers, sir?
You see, in that case, you have to understand that joining an army should be your own choice, and this can only be done for people who are adult. You cannot force your people to join the army. Even the adults cannot be forced to join an army. This is against human rights. I mean, if in the presence of a standing army, all that you can do is make an appeal. And if adult citizens they don't want to be part of the army, they have all the right to refuse that. And children are in no way. I mean, this is an aggression and oppression that they would commit by forcing them to fight. So only people who have a mature age, who can decide for themselves that yes, I am going to undertake this endeavor on my own behalf, only they are allowed to do so. Otherwise, you would be forcing children to do so, and forcing someone to undertake any form of battle, cannot be endorsed.
Thank
So my
you.
second question was regarding, you were saying that they should not be displaying the power proudly about the weapons, and I think it was not understood, sir, because we have a concept even during Tawaf that we used to do Ramal, and there's the concept, desire that you keep your horses ready. So this appears to be a bit controversial.
See, these are two different things. Ramal that is being done was done in the, you're not displaying it before non-Muslims in any way. It's like your own expression of the fact that you would not be oppressed, or you will not be, you are not someone who can be easily chewed by the enemies in any way. So this is basically your own expression before God that I am not going to be cowed down in any way. In the case of an army, when you are, if you look at the old stories, how the Pharaoh, for example, they would go out, how they would display their pomp and show. Similarly, if you look at some of the wars that were fought by Alexander the Great, and in recent times, I mean, not very recent, for example, in the time of Genghis Khan or Genghis Khan, the way they would present their own horses, it was not just meant for it's not just meant for overawing the enemy, which is what the Quran has said. When the Quran says that "Aiddu lakum mastata'tum min quwwatin wa ribatil khayl," that is an entirely different thing. That is that to keep your enemies in check, you have a whole armory, you have a whole weaponry system, so that it acts as a deterrent. So that is an entirely different thing, to act as a deterrent. But here the purpose is to show off. You see, the purpose is to show off and to tell other people that you are not only going to overawe them, but you are going to just run through them. So that is what being said here, that when you are fighting for the cause of God, remember this show off is not befitting. It does not hinge. It does not in any way connect yourself with such a noble venture in which you are trying to raise the flag of God aloft.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Thank you, Salman Aziz. We will be concluding our session here.